I am 78 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I understood what mattered. I believed it because life kept moving, and nothing had ever forced me to stop and question it. Things worked. Problems were handled. Time passed the way it always had. When you live long enough without a real interruption, you start to assume that the rhythm itself is permanent. My wife became ill in my mid-70s. It didn't arrive as a crisis. There was no single day you could point to and say, "This is where everything changed." It unfolded gradually, which made it easier to live inside without fully confronting it. There were appointments, conversations with doctors, stretches of waiting, and long periods where things seemed stable enough. I told myself this was manageable. I told myself we were adjusting. I told myself there would be time later for the things that felt heavier, the conversations that didn't seem urgent yet. That belief stayed with me right up until it stopped being true. At some point, her ability to speak began to fade, not all at once. At first, it was small things. Words came out slower, sentences were shorter. I noticed it, but I didn't treat it as a line you only cross once. Then one day, she struggled to answer a simple question. That was the moment when something shifted for me, even though I didn't fully understand it yet. I realized that the version of her who could respond, question me, interrupt me, and shape our conversations was no longer guaranteed to be there tomorrow. I wish I could say that realization immediately changed how I behaved. It didn't. I kept telling myself there was still time. I talked around important things instead of directly into them. I filled silence with updates and logistics. I assumed that years of being together had already communicated everything that needed to be known. As her condition progressed, conversation became more one-sided. She listened more than she spoke. She nodded. She squeezed my hand. She was present, but the back and forth that had defined our life together slowly thinned out. That was when I started saying things I had never felt pressure to say before. I talked about memories, about choices we had made, about how much of my life had been steadied by knowing she was beside me. None of it was dramatic, none of it was rehearsed. It came out because I finally understood that waiting no longer worked. I don't know how much of it reached her clearly. I don't know which words stayed and which ones passed by. What I do know is that the timing was wrong. She passed away not long after that. In the months that followed, people told me I had been lucky. They said we had time. They said many people don't even get that much. I understood what they meant, but I also understood something they didn't. Time doesn't help if you spend most of it assuming it will still be there later. By the time I finally understood what mattered, the person who mattered most was no longer able to hear it from me in the way I had always taken for granted. After she was gone, the world didn't fall apart the way people imagine it does. The days still arrived, the mail still showed up, the house stayed standing. That, more than anything, made the absence harder to understand. What changed was the way time behaved. Without realizing it, I had spent most of my life treating time like something I was managing rather than something I was using. There was always a sense that the important parts could be returned to later, once the necessary things were handled first. Work, responsibilities, keeping life orderly. Those felt productive, so they felt justified. Looking back now, I can see how much of my attention went into maintenance. I maintained schedules. I maintained routines. I maintained stability. What I didn't always maintain was presence in the moments that didn't demand anything from me except attention. After her death, the house became quieter in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not empty exactly, just uninterrupted. There was no one to check in with before the day ended. No one to listen to small updates that didn't really matter but somehow made the day feel complete. That's when the questions started to surface. Usually when there was nothing left to distract me from them. Why had I assumed understanding instead of confirming it? Why had I treated shared time as something durable rather than fragile? Why did I wait for the right moment instead of recognizing that ordinary moments were the only ones we ever really had? At 78, I don't feel overwhelmed by regret. That word gets used too easily. Life is complicated, and most people do the best they can with what they understand at the time. What I feel instead is clarity that arrived late. I finally understood that what mattered was never about keeping everything running smoothly. It wasn't about being efficient or responsible or prepared for every possible problem. Those things have their place, but they don't hold the weight we assign to them when time feels abundant. What mattered was showing up fully when nothing was forcing me to, speaking while conversation was still easy, sitting without filling the space, treating the people who felt permanent as if they were not. I had believed urgency belonged to emergencies. I understand now that it lives somewhere else entirely. It lives inside the assumption that there will be another chance. That assumption shaped decades of my life without my noticing. It influenced what I postponed, what I softened, and what I left unsaid because it felt safe to do so. At this age, I don't have the option of testing that belief again. I live with the knowledge that understanding what matters is not the same as acting on it, and that the difference between the two is often measured in time you don't realize you're spending until it's already gone. At 78, I don't spend much time trying to rewrite my life in my head. That exercise doesn't lead anywhere useful. What I do spend time with is the difference between what I once believed mattered and what I now understand does. For most of my life, I thought importance revealed itself through pressure, deadlines, problems, responsibilities that demanded attention. Those were the things that felt real because they asked something from me right away. What I didn't recognize was how much was quietly asking for my attention without urgency attached to it. Conversations that felt safe to delay, evenings that didn't require decisions, people who had always been there and therefore didn't feel at risk of disappearing. I treated those things as stable, almost permanent, without realizing how quickly permanence dissolves once you stop assuming it exists. There was no single moment when this understanding arrived fully formed. It settled in gradually, after the house grew quieter and days stopped needing explanation. It showed up in small realizations, usually late, usually uninvited. I began to see how often I had waited for the right time instead of recognizing that time itself was the condition. I had believed clarity would come first and action would follow. In reality, action was what clarity depended on. If I could describe what finally changed at this age, it wouldn't be a feeling. It would be a shift in how I measure things. I no longer measure days by what gets completed. I measure them by whether I was present when presence was available. I no longer assume that understanding travels silently between people. I understand now that silence only carries what you place inside it. This awareness doesn't arrive with comfort. It arrives with honesty. Knowing what matters doesn't undo what's been missed. It doesn't reopen conversations or return people to the room. What it does is remove excuses. It strips away the illusion that there will always be another ordinary day waiting to be used later. At this stage of my life, I don't speak from wisdom earned early. I speak from understanding earned late. And if there's one thing age has made unmistakably clear, it's that what matters most rarely announces itself while it's still within reach.